Thank you for joining me in the garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable. We've had some rain. Last month, things were pretty bleak in all of my gardens, but boy, a little rain really helps out a lot. We were watering some things by hand, but you just can't get enough water on things to replace the rain that didn't come for most of July and August. But now as we head into September, and we're in the middle of September right now, we're getting some regular rains, and it sure is feeling good for the plants because they're putting on new growth. Some of them are a little confused, and we'll get into that a little later. But fall is upon us, early fall. It used to be that when I first moved here about 50 years ago, the first frost was shortly after Labor Day. Now that's extended to probably the middle of October for this area, so we get a little extra season in at both ends, which is kind of nice. But it is time to start making some fall preparations as you do your gardening, and it's always nicer to work outside when the weather's still a little nice instead of waiting for the really cold days and when you know that frost is threatening that evening and the wind is blowing and everything. So you want to get some of the things done now, and then you can relax and enjoy the fall season. One of the things you can start with now is birdhouses. And I'm going to remove my birdhouse that's here and clean it out. And this one has a chain that comes loose quite easily. And before I do the birdhouse, I want to put on my mask and my gloves. And this is important because birds can carry some diseases and respiratory problems, fungus. So you really should wear a mask and gloves when you clean out the birdhouses. But it's important to clean them out. And then I put them away in the shed for the winter. Kind of saves on them, keeps them going. This one has a couple screws that we need to loosen or remove. And now I can empty out the contents of the birdhouse. And it has feathers and all kinds of other things. I will put this back together before I store it out in my shed for the winter. So that's done, and we have several other birdhouses that will do the same process. And again, store them away for the winter. The other thing you can do is take in some of the plants. This is the herb garden, and we're still using herbs, and many of them will be used right up until Thanksgiving. I can continue to use the sage and the thyme in my Thanksgiving turkey stuffing. But others of the herbs will go with the first frost, and some of them will be brought in. I have one rosemary that I've left in a pot all summer, and I also have a bay leaf plant, a bay plant that will come in. It's a tender plant that will not make it through the winter, especially not in a flower pot. Other of the plants will die back for the winter. I'm not going to cut anything back until spring. We'll leave it as it is. I will empty out the basil because it will go with the first frost, but we'll use it right up until then, and then I'll put the pot away. Any clay pots should not be left out for the winter because they will crack. The water will get in them, they freeze, and then they crack. But one of the things I want to take in is another rosemary. I have some degree of luck keeping it over the winter. Some years are better than others, but I'm going to pot this one up in a flower pot. I put a piece of paper towel in the bottom, and then I'm just going to fill in with the soil right here. And it is going to rain later, but I will be back before that, hopefully, and water this and water it in so that the roots have good contact with the soil. I will leave this out a couple more weeks. Rosemary can go down to 20 degrees without dying, so I can leave it out here, but I want to get it in when the temperature approaches that 20-degree time frame. What I do is I fill a saucer, a plant saucer, with pebbles or crushed stone, and then put the rosemary pots on top. I've had the best luck doing that. You keep water in the stones, and this provides the extra humidity that the rosemary likes during the winter. I have lemon verbena here and sorrel. The sorrel has gained a new life since the rain started, so I can start using that again as I would in the spring. Also, the lemon verbena will go with the first frost, so I'll want to pick that and dry some for tea and use it to make some other items before it's gone. I've tried cuttings of the lemon verbena, and I have not had much luck with doing cuttings of that particular plant, so I probably will just let it go with the frost and buy a new one next year. This is a spring blooming rhododendron. It's now September 20th. The weather has been very strange this summer, very hot, and then we now are getting some rain. This rhododendron is clearly confused about the season because it's putting on lovely blooms right now. I don't know how that will react next year, but we're getting some bloom right now. I think many of the plants are a little confused as to what is going on with the weather. The warm rain has increased our grass growth. Other things have put on new foliage when usually they would be cutting back for fall. Now we'll move over to the perennials. The grapevine is doing well, and there are a few grapes, but again, the dry weather had really done some damage to the setting of the fruit, so I think most of it will be consumed by the birds. My fall garden isn't as lush and colorful as I would like, thanks to the summer weather that was so dry. Some of the things that normally would have green foliage now have brown stems, like some of the phlox. It did bloom, but the bloom was short-lived. However, some of the fall blooming plants are getting ready to bloom. In the back, I have a Boltonia, which many people would think was an aster. It's actually a Boltonia. They come in white and pink. It's rather tall. It has white flowers. It stands up fairly well on its own, unless you have a lot of wind, and it makes a nice filler and flower arrangements. This is Eupatorium chocolate, and it has the dark foliage all season, and now it's set buds, and it'll have little white flowers as we go into the fall. This is Montauk daisy, and hopefully we'll get a few daisies from this. We have some dry brown leaves further down, but I think it will probably bloom within the next few weeks. I still have some house plants out here. This is the pineapple lily. It is a tender bulb. These plants will go inside for the winter, and what I'll do is bring it soon into my shed or the garage and let it dry. And the foliage will brown. I'll cut off the bloom stalks, and then I will just store it away in a cool bedroom for the winter and not water it until spring, when it will come up again and then bloom next summer. I can now pick things like the pods from the lilies. They make nice additions to fall arrangements, or winter ones if you use a little can of spray paint. You can spray them gold or silver and add them to your greens for a nice look. We'll do that a little later, but now's the time to collect them and put them into a dry place. These are asters, and they are pink dome and purple dome asters. They were looking a little sad before the rain started, and now they're setting their buds and should bloom, and this will be a sea of pink and purple in a little while. So we will get some fall color after all. One of the things I like to do in the fall is collect seed, and today is not an ideal day to do that. It rained last night for about an inch of rain, and it's slated to rain again later this afternoon. So it really isn't dry. But when I come out, this is a butterfly weed. It had orange flowers, and now these pods are setting seed, and they will fly all over the place at some point. what I do is collect these. Once the pods turn nice and brown and open up, I will collect them. And you have all this fuzz. Usually it's flying around. Today, again, it's dry. But you want to wait until the pods are nice and dark brown and start to open. And you'll have things flying all over. That's why I use a paper bag for these. And I'll collect both the fuzz and the seeds, put it in a paper bag, then shake the bag. You can do this with a lot of seeds. Shake the bag, the seeds will go to the bottom, the fluff will go to the top for the most part. And then you can save those seeds and plant them next year if you want to propagate some more butterfly weed. The butterflies love it. It is one of the things that the monarch butterfly can eat in addition to your common milkweed and swamp milkweed, which are a little more taller and weedier. This one is the pretty one of the milkweed family, I think, with its bright orange flowers. And even the seed pods are quite decorative in the fall as they turn brown. Your colors become a little more subtle in the garden as fall is upon us. I have a dahlia back here. The dahlias suffered this year, again, with the drought, but right now they're doing pretty well. Another thing that we have coming up are grape hyacinths. This is a bulb that is going to bloom in the spring, but it comes up right now in the fall, and sometimes the deer will nibble it a little bit. Doesn't seem to matter, but they come up in the fall, put on some foliage in the fall, and then come spring, they'll put on more foliage if it dies back, which it often does, and bloom. So it's perfectly normal to have the grape hyacinths come up, and also the oriental poppy, and I have one of those over on the other side here. This is another type of aster, New England Aster, and you can see it's starting to bloom already, and it is covered with buds. In another week or so, it should be actually full of these bright blue flowers. They complement nicely with the sedum autumn joy, which is pink right now, but this will turn a dark burgundy color before the season's over. I leave them in the garden. Again, when they dry, the burgundy color, they're good to pick, use in winter arrangements, and you can use them right now in fall arrangements. The deer do like sedum, so spraying it is an option if you have problems with deer. And I like to spray it early in the spring because they can really devastate it as it's coming up. Sometimes I get more bloom from the coreopsis. This year, I don't believe it's going to happen. It, again, dried fairly heavily during the drought. The black-eyed Susans came and went very quickly. I do leave the heads on the black-eyed Susans because the birds really like them. The chickadees particularly will come down and consume the seed. So most of the things I do leave up in the winter. We'll talk more about that next month. There are a few things that I do cut. Iris and daylilies being two that I really need to get cut in the fall. They both become a little disgusting if you let them go through the winter, and they're much easier to cut if you do it in the fall instead of waiting. Also, iris don't particularly like to be wet all the time, so if you can get the foliage off of them, they are a little drier over the winter. I've already cut back a few things. In the garden, I had the old daisies are gone, so that we can see the autumn joy that's in back. This is the poppy I was referring to. This is an oriental poppy. Again, it is perfectly normal for it to put up new foliage in the fall. It's been dormant since it bloomed, and then the foliage ripened and it just wasn't there. I cut it back, and this was a spot that I could put a flower pot or something, but now it's starting again to grow. Now let's head over to the vegetable garden and see what's happening there. The vegetable garden is at its usual place for this time of year, and I've planted a few new things in where I've taken things out. I had lettuce that had gone to seed, so I planted some bok choy and some lettuce and more arugula. And we have Some borage just coming up because that's what borage does when it seeds. I've also planted some tiny starts of basil and cilantro. It's always a question of whether they'll do anything because we don't know if it's going to get cold fast or if we're going to have a long, extended, warm fall. So it's always worth taking a chance. We've been picking the arugula for salads. I've been picking the celery, and celery is responding well to the increased water. It too was pretty dry, and celery is almost 90% water, so it really appreciates some rain. I'm getting a few peppers, including some hot peppers that I've planted, and Brussels sprouts in September, early September. What I do is I cut off the top, and I've left one to show you that I would take off this top right at this point. You can see how it looks different from the others because I've already taken it off. And we'll just take this one off. And what this does is it spurs it into growing the Brussels sprouts. You can see this doesn't have many, and these are starting to really develop along the stems. These are very hardy, and they'll stay through a frost in the garden. I have zinnias that are flowering. I try to get out here and deadhead them, make a bouquet or to bring in, or just cut them off. I did have an occurrence where rabbits got in my garden. When I was on vacation, the person that was watching my garden left the electric fence off, and the rabbits decided they could hop right in. So they did. And they kind of tore down the stems of the zinnias. And so I'm not getting as many, but I have enough for a bouquet inside almost all the time. I also have some Dara, which is a carrot relative, and that's a flowering carrot, and you'll notice it has purple blooms on it that look kind of like Queen Anne's lace. Next to it is Perpetual Spinach. And again, that was dry. You can see some dry leaves on the edges, but the new leaves coming up in the center are perfectly fine. And it's a lovely alternative to spinach. It's a very mild, charred type vegetable. I'm getting plenty of broccoli. Further over, we'll see that, make my way over. I've already taken out the main head of each broccoli, but it's forming these little secondary heads. And I figure you cut it up when you eat it anyway, so it's perfect. And we're picking those regularly to bring in. And I've frozen broccoli for winter. I froze my broccoli chopped this year because we like broccoli cheese soup. So I froze enough broccoli that's chopped. Takes up a little less space in the freezer that way. And I can make soup with it very easily. A few more zinnias. These weren't as ravaged by the rabbit. And a few everlastings over there. And straw flowers still blooming. And those I can cut and bring in for arrangements, dried arrangements for fall and winter. This is the Dara, or carrot. It's a carrot relative. My dill is mostly gone. This was some of it, but it is pretty well gone. I've taken out a few things that were in, things that have gone to seed. And that would include the beans and most of the squash and one cucumber, which was right in this empty spot. Actually, the string holding it together fell apart, and so it blew over, and we had had enough cucumbers. So I picked what was left, and we still have a few in the refrigerator, but the rest of the cucumbers have entered the compost pile for the winter. There's still plenty of kale, and I have over here planted a little more, just to overwinter if we can. Sometimes kale will overwinter and come back up in the spring. You never know. Sometimes it does not. I have cosmos, and again, these and the marigolds that I have here and there in the garden will all go quickly once it frosts. But broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, and arugula will stay very nicely without anything covering them, and we can continue to pick those items probably through Thanksgiving. So the garden isn't finished yet. Parsley also will stay for a very long time, and if I cover it, it will probably come back up next spring, and I can then use it as an early spring crop. Parsley's a biennial. It will have foliage this year, and next year it will have foliage, but then it goes to seed, which we have some parsley going to seed in the back. And I've let it go to seed in hopes that maybe we'll have some parsley coming up at that point. I'm still getting a few small zucchini, but again, we've had enough for the season, and it's time for those to go as well. The summer squash has finished and again been composted. The other cucumber you can see is gone, and that too will be composted very soon. I also planted a few radishes in here, so any seeds that I have left over, I tend to try in the fall, and if we keep getting these nice rains and have some nice sun and warm days, we'll probably get more of those vegetables, which are quite hardy. Radishes and lettuce. Not as hardy as the Brussels sprouts and broccoli, but hardy enough that we probably can withstand a light frost or two and still have them in the garden. Now let's go into the back. Oh, tomatoes. As I pass my tomatoes, I still have green tomatoes, plenty of them, and we'll see if we can get a few more to ripen up. As the days get shorter, it's harder for them to ripen. And any of them that turn orange or start to ripen, I can bring inside and finish the ripening process inside. So we'll just have to wait and see what they do. They're still here. The Tomatillo was a disappointment this year. Usually I have tons of tomatillos. This year I've had very few. I think I picked about 3. And usually on a plant this size I'd have a half bushel. So it's interesting to know that the season just wasn't conducive to growing tomatillo this year. We still may get a few, I don't know. It just doesn't look like it's going to do much of anything. So as the season continues and as the weather cools, I'll keep pulling things out of the garden. My planting is finished for the season, but we'll try to keep it cleaned up as things wilt and die and start the process of getting it ready for winter. Now on to the backyard to see what's blooming there. Starting to think about fall and how I'm going to close down the pond for the winter. We have quite a few elephant ears. I've got 4 elephant ears and a papyrus back there in my plants. Those will need to come in for the winter, as will this plant. So I'm thinking about that and how they will come in. Usually I can kind of barely keep them alive for the winter in my sunroom, and then when I put them out in the spring they take off again, which has been nice. But I'll lift them out of the water and wash them well with a mild soap solution and use some neem oil on them. We don't want to bring any livestock into the house that we don't want, and so we're trying to keep them bug free, and I'll rinse them off well, and then I'll bring them inside and set them in dish pans full of water or with several inches of water, and I keep those filled. Rather than watering them from the top, I just water them in a container at the bottom. If I have seed pods form on my impatiens, I'll collect the seeds. If not, they will just be composted at the end of the season. They are an annual and they are very easy to grow from seed next spring inside. If we have a light frost, they will be taken, but I can move them into the shed if it's just a light frost and get them back out and maybe get another week out of them before we have a heavier frost, or I forget to bring them in for the night. The same is true of the fuchsia and the begonia. The begonia, I will try to save the bulb from the begonia over the winter, and I may take some cuttings of the fuchsia or try to pot it or just decide to let it go. It will not make it through the winter outdoors. Once the leaves start falling really hard, and you'll notice there are leaves about now from the rain, I have a net, and I will unfold it and put it over the pond using in the middle a tripod that held a sprinkler once. The sprinkler failed to work anymore, so we kept the tripod, and the tripod will hold the net off the pond, and I will be able to keep many of the leaves from falling into it and forming a sludge at the bottom. A few hosta are left or have been left. It's time to take off the stems of those now that it's finished, and we'll just cut those back. I'll cut the rest of the hostas back once this frost has blackened the foliage or browned it at least, and we'll compost the foliage probably in a long-term compost pile in the woods. Now let's go in and see what we can do with some seasonal produce in the kitchen, and I also am going to do some potting shed type work that I was planning to do outside before it looked like it was going to rain, but we're going to do it inside today instead. A lot of the annuals have kind of gone by, so I like to put together a planter for fall to put on my front steps. I had an impatiens plant out there, and I know with even the slightest frost it will go. So I'm going to fill a basket with a flower pot and plant some fall plants in it. And I have a couple of chrysanthemums, and again, these I'll put in, and I will not consider these as perennials. I have tried planting them before, and they just usually don't do anything. And I'm going to just crowd the plants into this pot, and then we'll keep them watered well throughout the fall season. I can bring them in to my entry if it really gets cold. Let's see if we can get them all in here. It's a small pot. Push this one back a bit. I'm going to work in the front. And then I dug one of the pepper plants out of the garden. One of these Matchbox Peppers. We've been enjoying them. They're hot, quite hot, but they're tasty. And we'll pack some of the soil around it. And they were out last night, so the soil is very wet. But you can buy ornamental peppers. This one is actually edible, and the peppers are turning red, as you can see. And they are nicely edible. And then I have another fall and spring plant, which is a pansy. And I'm taking some of the soil off the bottom so that it will fit in my pot. And we'll pack that right in. And again, add some more soil around it. Now if you keep the spent blooms picked off the pansy, it will continue to bloom for quite a while. And this one I may be able to transplant to the garden and have it come back in the spring. I don't know. It's worth a try again. But we should get some nice purple blooms to accent the yellow and the rust of the chrysanthemums. I have a basket here I'm going to put it in, saucer and all, and try not to squash it completely. Turn it around so that we have the pepper and the pansy in the front, and then that'll go on my front steps for the fall season. The other thing I want to do, and I need to move some things, I want to do some more cuttings. And I've already done cuttings of coleus. And these plants will come in for the winter, and I'm putting 3 cuttings in each little pot. And once they have rooted, and they've started to root, coleus does root quite well. Once they've rooted, I will, this one came loose as I brought them in, but then I will put them in individual pots, and we'll keep them over the winter under my lights. And then in the spring, I will have cuttings to put in the pots again, in the containers that are outside. And so I've got 4 more containers. And I have rooting hormone. Rutone is the name of this one. And for each of the cuttings, I took the cuttings today outside. And this is the purple dragon. And I want to break it off right below a leaf node, and we'll dip it in to the cutting, the plant hormone, and then I have a little piece of dowel or a pencil, and I make a little hole and snug it in. And I'll do that with 2 others. And again, right beneath where a leaf is coming out, we take that leaf off, dip it in the hormone. This stuff roots very easily. You don't want too many leaves at the top. But this one I had already taken the leaves off. This is a succulent type plant, and again we'll pull those leaves off above the node, dip it into the rooting powder, and plant it. And keep the soil firm, and we'll keep these watered well so that they're firm. And I'll do another. I have 3 to do of each. This is a Plectaranthus, and again we'll take the leaves off near the node, dip it in rooting powder, and I'll continue this way till I have 3 of each in the pot. Now this one has a bloom stalk on it that's trying to bloom. I'm going to take that off. We don't want it to use its energy blooming, we want it to use its energy to root. And then the other one I have is another type of Plectaranthus. I think this is Argenta, a silver one. And again, the leaves by the node come off. I had cut it right below the node. And we'll put it in the soil. Now this whole setup, I put the tray under it simply because I'm inside. But this will go back outside, and you'll notice it's in a tray with an open bottom so it can drain. I'll keep them watered, put them in the semi-sun shade area, mostly shady, but a little afternoon sun, but part shade, and then bring them inside. And we'll keep them like this for the winter, and probably in December or early January, I will have enough plants to divide them up and plant each of the plants that's rooted in a new pot. And these plants will get, this particular coleus will get probably 3 or 4 feet tall in the summer, as long as you keep pinching out the centers so that it forms branches. Some of the others will get as tall, and the little succulents won't get quite that big, but they will get considerably larger and bloom in pots outside. So now I'm going to wash up before I go into the kitchen and prepare some seasonal treats. It's football season, and we watch football. We don't go in person anymore, but we do follow the Patriots, and we also watch some college football, especially from our alma mater in Michigan. So it's time to make some things for a tailgate supper. Whether you go to the game, I will mention how you can take it with you, or whether you want something to have after you've been out for a day of watching football or other fall activities. I'm going to start with an appetizer. We're going to move on to a soup and then a yummy dessert. All of these can also be prepared in advance so that they'd be ready when you get home if you're out watching the game in person and don't want to take it for a tailgate. I'm going to start by making a corn dip, hot, cheesy corn dip. And I have already cooked the corn, and I used 2 cups of corn, and it can be fresh or frozen. I used frozen, mainly because when I buy corn, we like to eat it as corn on the cob. But I used frozen corn and a tablespoon of butter, 2 cups of frozen corn, a tablespoon of butter, and I cooked that in the frying pan until it got kind of brown on the edges. Started to brown up and turn kind of a golden color. I'm melting some butter in a small frying pan, and to that I'm going to add half a cup of diced onion and a 1/4 cup of bell pepper, and I'm going to saute that for about 5 minutes. And we'll stir that as we go. We want to just get the onion nice and limp, and then we can add some other ingredients. Now we've sauteed this until the onion is kind of translucent and cooked a bit, and now I'm going to add 1 chopped, incidentally that was a half a cup of onion and a 1/4 cup of red bell pepper, and now I'm adding a chopped jalapeno, 2 chopped green onions, and 1 clove of garlic that's been minced. And we're going to let that cook a little bit too. Only about 2 minutes for this one. We just want them to get nice and fragrant, which they are starting to do already. I've tried to chop the pieces of these various vegetables so that they are about the same size, or in the case of garlic, smaller, than the kernels of corn were before I started cooking them. The corn does kind of shrink up when you cook it. Both of them were cooked in a tablespoon of butter. And now I'm going to turn it off and add it to the corn. And we'll stir that in and let it cool just a minute or so. And then we're going to add some other things. This dip has been very popular. I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. And I've combined to make a cup, a half a cup of jack cheese, Monterey Jack cheese, and a half a cup of sharp cheddar. And I'm going to add about 3/4 of that mixture to the corn and vegetables, and save the rest to put on top. And now I'm going to add this to a casserole dish. And at this point, if you were making it in advance, you could put it into the refrigerator and save it and cook it a little later. In which case you would adjust your oven timing so that it got nice and hot and bubbly. And I'm going to sprinkle the rest of the cheese on top. I lost a few pieces. And there it is. And then I'm going to put this into a 350 oven for about 15 minutes. Or you could use a slower oven, depending on what else you're cooking. And we just want it to get hot and bubbly. Everything is cooked, but it will mix and get hot and bubbly in the oven. Now the next thing I'm going to make is some soup. And I've made this one before because we really love this soup. And I have already browned a pound of Italian sweet sausage. And I still have a little of the sausage grease in the pan. It was not very fat, so I don't have too much. I browned this in a little olive oil simply because it doesn't have much fat. And I wanted to brown it, and then I have it ready to go in the soup. And we're heating the olive oil, and we're going to add to that 1 chopped onion and 2 cloves of garlic. We'll stir that around a little bit. And again, we want to brown that onion. And I also want to add a 1/2 cup of chopped peppers. And these are sliced roasted peppers that you get in a jar. So this is a good soup to make when you don't have a lot of fresh produce available, because you can use canned and dry, and you can use dried herbs. Today I'm using the fresh herbs, and I'm adding 2 tablespoons of fresh oregano and a tablespoon of rosemary that have both been chopped up. And I'm going to stir that around in the pot until they've gotten slightly browned. About 5 minutes. It's just starting to smell very nice and fall-like. I'm going to add back the sausage that's already been browned and removed. And I broke it up as I cooked it. I used link sausage and removed it from the casings. You could also, if you have access to the bulk sausage, that works too. The recipe can also be very easily doubled, and the soup freezes really well. So it's nice to have on hand if you have more in your family. And now we're going to add a quart of chicken broth, or vegetable broth if you prefer, although we already have sausage, so it is definitely not a vegetarian dish. And it's going to take that a little while to come to a boil. And 1 can of diced tomatoes. You could use fresh if you happen to have them on hand, which would be a pound of tomatoes. And a can of cannellini beans, which I have drained and rinsed and drained. I guess that would be the best. And those go in also. As you can see, it's fairly quick to put together. And now we want to heat that up, and then we're going to simmer it for about 20 minutes. And then we'll finish it a little later. Now, my husband would say, you should finish the whole recipe at once before you go on to something else. But that isn't the way it works in a kitchen when you're trying to make dinner for your family. It just doesn't work that way. While you're simmering one thing, you have to be working on another if you want to get dinner on the table in a reasonable length of time. So we're going to start and work on dessert while this continues to simmer for about 20 minutes. It's still, as soups go, a rather quick soup to make. And I'll just keep adjusting it. But I'm going to work on a dessert. And this dessert is a little different. It's cookies, and it's apple crisp cookies. That's what we're making. And I have my ingredients put together here. And they need to kind of follow the recipe. I'm making just a dozen of them. You would double this recipe if you wanted to make 2 dozen, which after you've tasted them, you probably will. And I have a 1/2 cup of butter, and I'm going to add to that a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. I'm sorry, a 1/2 cup of brown sugar and 2 tablespoons of white sugar. And we're going to mix that with the mixer. Until it's nice and combined. And sometimes it's easier to put your bowl on a pot holder or other mat while you're mixing with a hand mixer. It keeps it from flying around quite as much. And then I want to add 1 egg. And we'll mix that in well. And then we add some dry ingredients, which would be 3/4 cup of flour, and a teaspoon, or I'm sorry, a 1/2 teaspoon baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. We'll mix that in. Start out a little slow. And then I'm going to add a 1.5 cups of oatmeal, and I've used old-fashioned oats. You could probably use quick oats, but I wouldn't use instant oatmeal. And we'll mix that in. Get as much as we can off the mixer. And then the fun begins, the messy part, but essential. We're going to put this mixture into muffin pans. We're making little cookie cups. And I'm going to use a good scoop in each cup. Probably about 3 tablespoons in each cup. And I may have to add more. I think we need to do this. And we'll get all we can out of the bowl. And then I will use some flour and flour my fingers, and we're going to push these down into the cups. I have sprayed the muffin pan with cooking spray. But what I want to do is make these little cups around the edge, and it helps to flour your fingers. These are going to go in the 350 oven for about 15 minutes. You want them to be browned, but still soft in the middle. And then we need to make a filling for these cookie cups. As our soup continues, I'm going to get out another pan, and I'm going to make an apple filling for the little oatmeal cookie cups. And I'm using a 1/2 cup of water and 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and I needed to get a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar as well. I think I had it in there, so we have enough. And then I want a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon and a pinch of cornstarch. 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. I'm sorry, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. I'm making a smaller recipe, so I will read the ingredients that I am using again. 2 tablespoons light brown sugar, 2 tablespoons granulated sugar, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon, and a 1/2 cup of water. And I'm going to put this on the burner and turn it on and bring it to a boil. I've mixed it well, and we're going to boil that for a few minutes, about 2 minutes. And while it is getting ready, I can prepare some apples. I want 1.5 cups of apples, and I've already chopped those and put 2 teaspoons of lemon juice with them to help with the browning process. They have browned a little because I did need to make those a little early in the day. But we'll bring this is going to thicken up quite a bit. There we go, it's starting to thicken. I'll stir that around for a minute. And turn down my heat. You can see that it's thick and dried up. I'll stir it about a minute. And then add 1.5 cups of apples that have been mixed with some lemon juice. Here are our apple crisp cookie cups just out of the oven. And what I'm going to do, you'll see how they've puffed up. And this is the time that I will use my coffee measure and just push down the centers. Actually, I could have cooked these a little bit more perhaps, but pushing down the centers, and then they will stay this way. And I'll leave them in the pan for about 5 minutes. They will continue to cook some as they're in the hot pan. And then I'll remove them to a rack. All you need to really do is use a little paring knife around the edges in order to get them out. And they come out quite easily if you've used the cooking spray on the pan. Then you can let them cool completely before you fill them with the apple filling. And this is the finished apple filling once it's cooked. And I'm going to keep stirring that filling once in a while so that it doesn't burn as we go. It's quite thick until the apples express some of the juice from it. But we're going to fill the cups with about a tablespoon of the apple filling. I'm going to do 4 of them. And I have some muffin papers to put them in. And this would probably be done shortly before you consume these cookies, or are they cupcakes? I don't know. They are somewhere in between, I think, but they are apple crisp. Now, this was the original recipe, the way it was written, but I added to it, and what I'm adding is some streusel on top. And the streusel mixture that I made was 1/2 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of each brown sugar and butter. And you mix that together and bake it at 350 and stir it occasionally until it forms brown crumbs, and break it up as it goes. And then I added that on top because I thought it added a nice look and a nice flavor to the apple crisp. It gave it a little extra crispness. This stuff is also good, the streusel mixture. You can put it on ice cream or on fruit. It works really well for a quick dessert. and it keeps in the refrigerator for quite a while. So now it's time to finish the soup and take our corn casserole out of the oven. The soup has been simmering, and I'm going to add a couple more ingredients. And I'm going to add a tablespoon of cider vinegar. This kind of brightens up the flavor. And again, with all of these things, sour, we can add salt and pepper to taste. And 2 cups of kale, which has been broken into pieces. You can add more or less kale. And I'm going to just let that cook a few minutes. And also add a 1/2 cup of heavy cream. And at this point, we don't really want it to boil hard. And the kale will soften and cook very quickly. Might bring the temperature up a little bit more. And now we're ready to take things out of the oven and put it on the table. And we're going to serve the corn dip with some scoops, some corn chips. And I'll put a spoon in for serving. We have our dessert all set, and all we need is our soup. And I'll put out some napkins and some mugs and move our centerpiece over, and we'll be ready to go. And we'll dip out some of the soup to serve. Now, if you're taking all these items to a tailgate party, and you didn't plan to cook them while you were there, which you probably wouldn't be, you could put the soup in a thermos jug or bottle and take it with you to be served. You might want to use disposable plates or cups in that case. The casserole, if you have a casserole that you're taking someplace, you can wrap it in foil and then newspaper, and it will stay very hot for quite a while. So your hot corn dip would stay nice and hot before you got to your destination. Add a nice flower display. Maybe a few apples along the way. And there's a meal for a football Saturday, whether you're home or maybe a football Sunday if you're actually at the game and want to tailgate. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden with some time in the kitchen on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.